There are a lot of weird coincidences in the world. For example, my mother and my father actually share the same children. But get this, throughout history there have been some even more mind-blowing coincidences. There is a massive coincidence that relates to the political leadership of Russia. It is a pattern. The pattern is that every leader of Russia who has no hair is directly followed by a leader with a full head of hair. The next leader after that is bald, and the pattern continues. This is 100% true, and there is a long-standing joke in Russia that a candidate may only be elected if they fit the pattern. The coincidence began with Tsar Nicholas I, who was bald even though he did sport a mighty comb-over. He was followed by hairy fellow Alexander II, then baldy Alexander III, who was succeeded by hairy monster Nicholas II. Moving forward, Vladimir Lenin had no hair, and he was followed by the multi-head Joseph Stalin. Bald Gorbachev, to hairy Yeltsin, to bald Putin, to this guy, to bald Putin again. Will the cycle ever be broken? In the 14th century there lived a Mongol leader named Timur. He led his armies to expansion across Central Asia, and his campaigns were so effective that they caused the deaths of 17 million people, which was 5% of the human population at the time. His tomb was discovered by Soviet archaeologists. When they entered his tomb, they found an inscription that read, "Whoever opens my tomb shall unleash an invader more terrible than I." The date was the 20th of June 1941, just one day before Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union. Émile Deschamps was a 19th century French poet. When he was a young boy, he met a Mr. M.D. Fortescue. Fortescue had just returned from England, where he had enjoyed eating plum pudding. This was when plum pudding wasn't produced, sold, or imported into France. He told Deschamps that he must try it before he dies. 10 years passed before Deschamps found a restaurant selling plum pudding. The last slice of pudding had just been bought by a man sitting at a table. Deschamps approached the man to ask if he may have some of it. To his shock, the man turned out to be M.D. Fortescue. A few years later, Deschamps was a guest at a dinner party. At the party, plum pudding was served, and by pure coincidence, one of the other guests was Mr. Fortescue. Anne Parrish was an American novelist. Sometime in the 1920s, she was in an old second-hand bookstore in Paris. She picked up a book called Jack Frost and Other Stories. She remembered that it was one of her favorite books from her childhood. Opening the book, she saw an inscription that read Anne Parrish, 209 N. Weber Street, Colorado Springs. That very book belonged to her when she was a young girl, and by pure chance had found its way to a Parisian bookstore. One of the most interesting coincidences of all time involves the sinking of 3 ships along the coast of Wales. On the 5th of December 1664, a ship sank with over 80 passengers. The only survivor was called Hugh Williams. In 1785, a different ship sank in the same area, on the same day. The only survivor was called Hugh Williams. 2 different survivors with the same name, in the very same waters, on the very same day, 121 years apart. On the 5th of December, 75 years after the second incident, a 3rd ship sank. The sole survivor was Hugh Williams. Barbara Forrest was born in 1954. Mary Ashford was born in 1797. Both women were brutally murdered. And even though the killings took place 157 years apart, there are some startling parallels between the two. Both bodies were discovered on the 27th of May, and in the same town, and within 400 yards of each other. Both bodies had been hidden, and they were killed at the same time of day. They had both been to a dance that night. The two men accused of the murders were both acquitted. Perhaps the most mind-numbing part is that both accused men shared the name Thornton. Thomas Jefferson and John Adams were both founding fathers of the United States. Together, the two men created the Declaration of Independence, a document that was approved on July 4, 1776. It is by coincidence that both men died exactly 50 years after their document was approved, July 4, 1826. The Scottish play. That is the name used to refer to the play Macbeth. To use the name Macbeth is considered bad luck, as many people believe it to be cursed. The superstition comes from a coincidence. A lot of people have died during productions of the play. In the very first performance, an actor was stabbed to death when a real dagger was accidentally used in place of a fake one. This was in the 17th century, and there have been many more deaths since. Most who died were playing the part of Lady Macbeth. One of the most famous accidents was when an actress fell off the 15-foot-high stage. During a production in 1937, the tip of one of the swords used broke off and hit a man in the audience, killing him. In 1942, 3 actors died during the play, and the costume designer commits suicide immediately after. There are a lot more Macbeth deaths, many of which far too gruesome for me to describe. During construction, 112 men died working on the Hoover Dam. The first man to die was called J.G. Turney. It was on the 20th of December 1922. The last death occurred on the 20th of December 1935. Exactly 13 years later. The man was called Patrick Turney, and it was his father who died 13 years before. Edgar Allan Poe wasn't just a great writer, he was also a great fortune teller. In 1838 he published a novel called The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket. It was a scary story of greed and mutiny. The book featured a chapter where Arthur Pym found himself stranded in a small rowing boat after the shipwreck. He was with 3 other starving men. They decided to kill and eat the cabin boy, named Richard Parker. 35 years after Edgar Allan Poe died, there was a shipwreck. A rowing boat of 3 survivors killed and ate the cabin boy in the boat with them. The cabin boy was called Richard Parker. This is 100% true. When they returned to England, the men were convicted for the murder of Richard Parker. And so that's the last of our coincidences. I'd love to know what you guys think of these strange events, so be sure to leave a comment.